Simon Pegg is very much vocalizing his disdain, kind of, for the new Star Wars films, and he says here that they're missing George Lucas. Now, there are people out there that would vehemently disagree with that, right? Those are called the Last Jedi fans that are like, no, it's so much better now without Lucas. That's essentially what they're going to be like. But he's not wrong. As much as I like The Force Awakens, and as much as there are parts of The Last Jedi that I did enjoy, and I love Solo, there is an element that's missing, and that element is George Lucas. Now, there's a YouTuber by the name of Razor Fist who reviewed The Force Awakens back in 2015, and he broke down the prequels in that review that gave me a whole new appreciation for them, to a new lens to look at them through, about how Lucas was trying something different and how Disney is just recreating more of the same. And I think looking at even The Last Jedi, how it did pull a lot of thematic elements from not only Empire, but Return of the Jedi itself. It's kind of falling in that trap. And Simon Pegg, I think, is caught on that as well. Now, it says here that the Hot Fuzz star came to an epiphany about how he felt about Lucas and the worldwide hit, saying, I must admit, watching the last Star Wars film, The Last Jedi, the overriding feeling I got when it came out was, I miss George Lucas, which is a subtle way of saying this movie sucked, right? For all the complaining that I'd done about him in the prequels, there was something amazing about his imagination. Think about that for a second, right? Think about that for a second. Simon Pegg is criticizing The Last Jedi, saying like, I miss Lucas. I miss Lucas. His imagination was amazing in the prequels. In the prequels, he's going to basically say that they were better than he remembers because the imagination was there. Whether or not you like the dialogue or the acting, you have to admit there's a lot more imagination in those movies, right? Yes, it was kind of filling in the gaps we've already known about this particular story because they are prequels, but him imagining the fall of the Republic and the birth of the Empire and everything else, it was very interesting. And it was full of more imagination than I would argue The Last Jedi was, right? And even The Force Awakens, as much as I like it, it was not that imaginative. And I really think that like this is just a nice subtle kind of FU to that movie. Now, Pegg, who has come to regret his very vocal Jar Jar hate, has been cast in a plethora of films by J.J. Abrams. And we wonder how the director would react to his friend's closing comments on George Lucas' absence from the sequel trilogy, saying here, I do feel like his voice is missing from the current ones. And as Jar Jar might say, Misa oucha. Now, he goes on to talk about, in this article, Simon Pegg kind of retells a meeting with George Lucas a while back where Lucas and him are talking, and he thought Lucas was going to like hate him or think he was a fanboy or whatever. But when he heard that he did Shaun of the Dead, his demeanor changed. And this is kind of how it works out. Like when you make a movie and it's an impactful film, or you do something that's impactful, people who come up to you and always kind of tell you that it's impactful, you kind of like, you wait for it, you brace for impact kind of. But when it's another fellow creative or person in your industry, and you realize that, it's like guard comes down, like, oh, cool, I don't have, okay, like, awesome. Like this, it's talk shop sort of thing. And that's true. I mean, YouTubers do it all the time. But in this story, he says, Lucas gave him a piece of advice saying, you don't want to be making the same movie today that you'll be making 30 years from now. Right. And talking about the constant evolution, the constant changing. And that makes sense. That's what he's referring to. He's like, you're referring to the prequels as something that's not a constant, referring to the prequels as something that's different, that's ultimately changed. And I think that is probably one of the better ways to approach this particular, what Simon Pegg is saying. It's a way to, I think it's a way to gauge how Lucas himself views the new films, probably viewed The Last Jedi, was like, you don't want to be making the same movie. This is different, but it's still whatever, you know, and it does make sense what Simon Pegg is saying. He watched The Last Jedi and he went, oof, I miss Lucas. And amongst a lot of The Last Jedi critics, those who did not immediately write it to the sunset, like they're trying to escape freaking Canto Bight, people out there thought the same thing. This is missing something. It's missing that certain je ne sais quoi. And I think it's Lucas. It is. He doesn't have to direct the movies. He doesn't even have to really produce the movies. But I still think keeping him on board to get an idea for what he wants is, or where he might be thinking, it could help. Now, I'm not saying every idea is great. Where he wanted the new movies to go with the midichlorians and everything else, like, No, I'm okay with that not being a thing. But there's other elements outside of the midichlorians that were only in Phantom Menace that were, that we saw in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith that I think tied into what he was trying to do. And yes, he made Phantom Menace for his kids, but he took a bit darker of approach for the next two films, and fans responded kindly to that, especially Revenge of the Sith. It's regarded as the best one of the prequels. And so I think ultimately that experimentation, that changing, is what fans want more than just some of the same, which is what we kind of got with The Force Awakens, and we got with The Last Jedi. Yeah, they were kind of different in their own right, but at the same time, thematically, they still felt similar. Now, and I'm hoping that episode 9 does not go down this path. I'm hoping episode 9 is nowhere near what I'm thinking on this one, but it could be. It entirely could be. I have no idea. If it does pull another kind of, we're just going to remake Return of the Jedi, but with this new cast, then I think even I'm going to check out of Star Wars, because I don't want that. I do want something new, but I also want it handled with care. And that's my complaint with The Last Jedi is, yes, it was something new, but it wasn't handled with care. There was an ego behind it, right? There was Rian Johnson's ego behind The Last Jedi showed all the way through. J.J. Abrams doesn't necessarily have an ego in regards to The Force Awakens or this new one, I think. He wants to play in that playground still, but he's just afraid of breaking the mold. And you can walk that fine line, and I hope we get that here, but I think even Lucas understood that. And I think Pegg misses it, because as a writer and as a creative, he understands it. And I'm hoping that, he's told that to J.J. Abrams, and J.J. has taken that to heart. I think Chris Terrio on board is going to be different than Lawrence Kasdan, and I think that's going to be in a good way. So that's kind of how I view that. But ultimately, I'm glad to see people in Hollywood coming out and saying, no, we miss George Lucas, because I do. I won't deny it. I won't hide from it. I won't run from it. I do. I miss George Lucas.